Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin, a twice-weekly show focused on the ideas, projects, and people building the new digital economy and the future of money. If you're brand new to Bitcoin and would like to learn more, please visit letstalkbitcoin.com/learn to be directed to the Bitcoin Education Project. My name is Adam B. Levine. I'm a writer and speaker who likes to talk about complicated topics in understandable terms. Joining me in our twice-weekly search for clarity, Andreas M. Antonopoulos is an expert in distributed systems and decentralized networks.
Hi, everyone.
Dr. Stephanie Murphy is a scientist and syndicated radio host.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me again, guys. And Stephanie, thank you very much. I know that you're here with some maladies still from... You've been sick for the last week.
Yeah, I don't want to go through the whole saga, but basically I had a sore throat that turned into an ear infection, and let's just say I'm having a little trouble hearing right now. So if you hear me during the show, like doing a little John and just going, "What?" you'll know why.
Before we get into the news, we're going to talk a little bit about the follow-up from last week's show. Last week, we talked about ASICs. We talked about whether or not ASICs were a good thing or a bad thing in the ecosystem, and kind of playing out the logic, really what the point of mining is. So we've gotten a big response to this, and a lot of it, I think, is valid, but doesn't really understand the point that we're trying to make. It's easy to focus on details when you look at topics like this, because there are all these variables floating around. People have money invested in mining technology. People have money invested into computer hardware that's meant to be efficient at mining. But this sort of misses the point. So to start us off, I wanted to play a clip from the Bitcoin Report, actually one of the other shows that I listen to and one of the longest running shows in the Bitcoin space. You can find it at thebitcoinchannel.com. So here's Brother John F. talking about it.
I wanted to talk about this controversy. Now, they've talked about on Let's Talk Bitcoin, the issue of, is this a danger? Are the ASIC miners a threat to Bitcoin? And the issue being, will there be a 51% violation and hard fork? And some of the solutions proposed. One of the ideas was that supposedly Satoshi's vision was that it was one CPU, one vote. Now, I have to say, as a free market person, to me, that is just one of the stupidest ideas you could come up with. A free market is not a democracy. A free market is about $1, one vote, or one Bitcoin, one vote. In other words, the prices in a free market are determined by the economic strength of the players, barring some sort of monopolistic control and a lack of competition. That's something that is beneficial to everyone. And I think we're seeing that with the rise of all these companies involved in the ASIC miners. If we would have stayed with this idea of one CPU, one vote, which obviously couldn't even be implemented because there are CPUs that are i7s, there are CPUs that are Celerons, so that's not even possible. You'd have differences in CPUs. That's something that is just speculative. It doesn't even make any sense. But even if that were the case, that they had limited it to some type of CPU democracy, then obviously we would not have ever had this type of technological development.
People get caught up on the price argument. And I think that that's where a lot of this confusion comes from. When it comes to this particular argument that I am making, at least I'm not sure about everybody else here, but to my perspective, the reason why one CPU, one vote is important is not because all votes are equal, but because all votes matter. This is akin to saying that, you can vote with dollars, but only certain people can have dollars. Now, that's not to say that people won't be allowed to have ASICs. I'm sure if you want to spend money on them, you can buy them. But the point is that because ASICs and GPUs, to a certain extent, are so much more efficient, it makes it so anyone who doesn't make the investment in that specialized hardware not have a voice. Now, again, that's different from what he was kind of ascribing there, which was more along the lines of the price is the price, is the price and it's determined by market forces. That's fine. But the thing that keeps resonating to me is that Bitcoin as a useful object, that actually doesn't depend on the price. The price is completely irrelevant of that and more just a value of how useful people find it. Whereas actually what you're talking about is that it exists at all. And so long as it exists at all, that is the important part. So price aside then, You look at what is mining supposed to do. And again, to me, mining is supposed to distribute hashing power as widely as possible, because lacking such a wide distribution, it's easier for a regulatory body or a natural disaster or a flaw that's found in the technology to completely unravel the entire network. As opposed to if you have this redundant system, it doesn't even matter if one CPU is better than the other. The point is that they still contribute in a way where, if lacking other competition, they are competitive. As opposed to the situation we have now where mining on a CPU is, a joke at best. Am I missing something here, guys?
Satoshi did say one CPU, one vote. Not supposedly. It's right there in the paper on page 4. So this is not a supposed direction from Satoshi. This was very much the goal. But one CPU, one vote doesn't mean... It's not just a matter of counting CPUs. It's a matter of orders of magnitude, right? Essentially, a GPU gives you almost 1,000-fold increase over a CPU, at least. An ASIC gives you another 1,000-fold increase over that. So, it's not just a matter of degrees, it's a matter of orders of magnitude. And that's the main issue. Plus the fact that ASICs are currently not available. There's very little availability in the market, would lead to the kind of centralization that can be easily controlled. I really don't know whether, in fact, the Bitcoin protocol is a free market or should be a free market. Maybe it should be a democracy. It supports a free market, but should the rules by which Bitcoin operates be subject to change by anyone who achieves the highest hashing rate? Because at the end of the day, that's what that vote does. It's not about splitting a 51% attack. It's about when a decision is made by developers to include feature X versus feature Y, the network votes on that decision by deciding whether they adopt the new version and fork one way or another. Essentially, this vote is over the protocol and the math in Bitcoin, not the economy itself. From that perspective, do you really want a situation where the richest Bitcoiners, or the people with the most power in the real world who can affect real-world ownership of these devices, essentially get complete veto over how the network works? I think that's a problem. I don't think that should be the way the market works.
I think the Bitcoin network is essentially a market phenomenon. I don't think it could be a democracy, because that kind of requires some kind of centralization, and we all know it's very decentralized. I mean, we could use whatever analogy we want to choose to talk about it, whether it's the network votes or the market speaks or whatever, but it's kind of the same process happening, and it is happening on a decentralized level. I think ultimately that's what we all have in common, right? Our discussion on this show, we were kind of fearing too much centralization happening because of the prevalence of ASICs. He was also kind of afraid of that too. He wants people to be able to have a voice and not be restricted in how much of a voice they could have. So, I don't know, maybe we agree on some level.
Yeah, I think you're very right about that, Stephanie. We do agree on some level. I mean, at the end of the day, we both want to see Bitcoin succeed and be basically free from undue influence. I think that's the main issue. What undue influence can be imposed if you have 4 or 5 orders of magnitude difference between one miner and another? Especially if you take this out to a global phenomenon. You're really saying that a very, very, very small minority who will be able to get high-powered ASICs will control the network entirely. I don't think that's a particularly good idea.
Something else that kind of jumps out at me about this is there's a differentiation that is not being appreciated here between what is good for Bitcoin as a network versus what is good for the price of Bitcoin. And then beyond that, there's another level too. What is good for individual miners? Because, in that statement he made, he said, we wouldn't have had the technological innovation in ASICs without this sort of incentive structure. And I agree with that. But The question is it necessary, and is it helpful for anyone besides the miners who can get the newest technology earliest? Bitcoin protocol, the network needs a certain minimum amount of power in the network in order to process everything and make sure things happen in a timely fashion. But once you get past that, isn't it just more of a security mechanism?
I think it's already showing in terms of a drop in adoption. Listen, a lot of people took up Bitcoin in the beginning because this was a way through which they could use their regular computer to generate a small amount of income. That's no longer the case. And that removes a very, very big adoption motivator, especially outside the developed world, where access to technology like ASICs will be restricted. Keep in mind also that ASICs can be restricted by government much more easily than general purpose computing. So switching this from a general purpose computing consensus network to a highly specialized computing consensus network severely impacts the adoption, and I think it already has. If I try mining just for fun, just to see how it works, I'm going to do it on Litecoin or Feathercoin because I simply don't have the ability to do it anymore on Bitcoin.
You know, in addition to the concern about governments monopolizing this sort of technology and saying, okay, well, general purpose computers, we can't do anything about those because they're used for all kinds of things. But these computers, these are specific devices that are used for this one specific thing that we don't like. And so it's easy to ban those. But beyond that, actually, I was having a conversation with somebody. We've been looking at various ways of, funding the show and treating it like a startup and things like that. One of the companies that I was talking to is actually currently developing a ASIC that will never be sold, that is being built on 14 nanometer platform and will be, again, substantially more, sort of I'm looking for here, efficient than anything that's on the market. There was just an announcement that came out this morning or yesterday that was something along the lines of 28 nanometer chips are going to be coming out from, I think it was AMC or ANC, I can't recall, of ASIC hardware. And so they're, again, looking at an exponential increase over what Butterfly Labs has been releasing, what Butterfly Labs has been putting out. You've just got to think that if we still have these exponential increases in performance that are coming out, and it all has to do with efficiency, we're going to have situations like this where companies that simply want to be able to control the network or want to be able to control mining and have, all of the revenue that comes into Bitcoin come into them, just build in-house chips where they don't have to fund from outside sources, because it's not like it's that much money if you're a large capital firm. And then you just do it. Run a giant room full of hyper-efficient ASICs that you never sell to anyone but yourself. I mean, that seems like that's a real problem. And it seems like it's much easier to do that when you can develop specific ASICs that have these advantages versus if you're just using a system that is strictly tied to general purpose computing. You can still build farms of general purpose computers that, that are designed to do this, but it's the efficiency of it that makes it so much more difficult. Yeah.
It doesn't scale 100,000 times more. Hey, Adam, let's ask ourselves, how many 14 nanometer fabs exist in the world? It's a handful. It's literally a handful of fabs that can do 14 nanometer. It's a $2-3 billion investment to have a 14 nanometer fab. If 3 or 4 companies have 14 nanometer fabs and can develop these ASICs, I say we rename those companies and call them the Global Federal Reserve. Because that's what they are. And as soon as you have a government that's able to say, hey, let's ban ASICs in the States. Oh, oops. Now the States is no longer involved in above-the-board mining, and it's fairly easy to find who's mining. And so now the Federal Reserve of Samsung in China is running the Bitcoin network and all of the decisions. Very dangerous situation.
And that's the fear. I mean, I think that's the thing that we're coming up against. And it's not like this hasn't been true since the beginning. It's just that the pace at which it's happened. If you talk to people who were involved with Bitcoin 4 years ago when it was getting started, it's not like ASICs hadn't occurred to them. It's not like graphics cards hadn't occurred to them. It's just that nobody understood the pace at which this incentivized progression would actually be able to take place. And so we're to a place much, much further down the road than anybody ever thought that we would be, both in terms of price, but also in terms of network complexity and just the number of players in it. And so, yes, it's good that there are 4 or 5 ASIC players out there. But the point remains is that it's 4 or 5 ASICs players out there versus the entirety of the general computing network, the entirety of internet savvy computers, and phones. I mean, once you toss in phones to that, we have all of these users who are completely disenfranchised when it comes to mining, and the only way they can participate is to buy in or to work in, but you can't participate in mining anymore. I'm not sure that that's the way things should be, and frankly, I don't think that, however you want to describe it, it's good for the network.
You're listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin, the premier audiocast providing news and insights that cover the rapidly evolving world of digital money. Our twice-weekly shows include analysis of late-breaking news, updates on key technical, business, and regulatory issues, and in-depth interviews with the key people driving the new digital economy. Let's Talk Bitcoin offers sponsors an attractive way to reach a targeted and savvy audience. For more information, email sponsors@letstalkbitcoin.com.